John. Thank you so much for having me on today. My name is Kawana T. King, and I am Senior Corporate Counsel at Google here in New York City.
Kawana, thanks so much for making time join us on the Ivy podcast. It's a great pleasure. There's a lot that I want to discuss with you, and definitely appreciate you making the time to share your background, your expertise, and everything that you actually currently doing. Before we do that, maybe give us a thumbnail version of your career, your timeline, and anything that you can highlight from your background. That would be great.
Well, I guess I'm about to age myself, but I've actually been practicing law for over 15 years now. After graduating from law school, I entered into the what they call big law pretty much immediately. I went to work at a law firm called Proskauer Rose and started my career as a litigator. Over time, I developed more of an interest in regulatory and transactional work, particularly in the area of technology and privacy. And so after a few years, I actually pivoted and joined another law firm, Manatt, Phelps and Phillips, where I was in their advertising, marketing, and media division. And within that time, I was the lead counsel for a lot of major companies, basically advising them on all of their consumer protection, advertising, marketing, media, and privacy related matters. And that gave me the opportunity to enter into the world of tech. And I then joined Google. I guess this was in 2014, I believe. So yeah, I've been with Google for 9 years now, supporting our advertising division in various capacities. First as a P counsel, advising the product team and the engineers on the ideation and development and marketing and facilitation of our products out into the world. And now I'm a lead commercial counsel where I work with our business teams and our partnership teams to make sure that we are onboarding partners to use the amazing solutions that we have. So that's a high level of what my legal career has been to date.
Well, what a background! What an incredible and congrats on all of the accomplishments. And that's unbelievable. Where did you get your law degree from?
I went to Harvard for law school.
Great. Well, and tell us a little bit more, taking yourself back to those days before you actually decided to go on that journey, to choose a career in law. What was the thought process? What were some of the influences that really helped make that decision? Maybe just take us a little bit back to those days, and how did you go about that decision?
Yeah, no, well, the seed was planted pretty early on when I was younger. People you always say, "Oh, you like to argue, so you should go to law school. You should be a lawyer because you like to argue." I guess that was the case. I just like to have conversation, but if they wanted to call it arguing, fine. So because that seed was planted, I think I just always had an interest in the law and pursuing the law. So after graduating, and even in high school, I was on like the debate team and things of that nature. And so then after high school, I went on to Howard University, which is a historically Black college in Washington, D.C. And one of the main reasons why I chose Howard, not only because it's Howard, but because it was in D.C. and I had interest in politics as well. And so I wanted to also be, obviously close to that area within the political scene. And that was a great experience. I was on a mock trial team there. I was a part of our pre-law society. So again, I already had in my mind sort of what my career path was going to be. Sometimes in retrospect, and this is what I share with folks, I sometimes wish I had been a little bit more exploratory, honestly, when I was in college. I probably would have still ended up doing the same thing, but part of me wishes I would have kind of tried to see like maybe what else was out there, just in case, things would have taken a different path or a different course. But I'm still happy about where I landed. And then going on to Harvard Law School, I mean, that was an amazing experience as well, an opportunity. Coming from Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, this was going to be, my first time, attending a predominantly white institution, and to have the opportunity to attend, Harvard coming from Bedford-Stuyvesant, it seemed really like a blessing. It was very intimidating, of course. And I definitely felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, maybe my first week. But then after the first week, I was like, oh my God, we're all clueless. So that, and then it made me realize, no, I deserve to be here just as much as anyone else. So it was wonderful being able to learn from some of the most brilliant minds, the likes of, Randall Kennedy and Charles Ogletree and Alan Dershowitz, and also, oh my God, why am my famed contracts professor, who's now the senator from Massachusetts, that causes some of our big companies to take a look at themselves. Elizabeth Warren, excellent contracts professor, brilliant woman. So again, it was an amazing experience, and I feel very fortunate to have had that opportunity to experience that level of academic rigor and brilliance at the same time.
Take us back to also the decision to apply Harvard Law. Obviously, very, you've mentioned an intimidating process. Same thing, it was very much so for me because it just seemed like a very unattainable goal at the moment when I even thought about it. I mean, mine was a lot simpler than yours, just business and nothing as complex as law. But talk to us about that during that time. How did you prepare? What were some of the the motivations and also the influencers that really helped you through that process? The reason I ask that is because if I do a lot of mentoring and coaching with a lot of folks, especially the immigrants who are coming from other countries here into US, and they want to pursue degrees in at the top level of all of the institutions here in US, and it's very interesting conversations all around. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how did you go through that process? How did you prepare? What are some of the discoveries and maybe lessons learned through that exercise that you could share with us?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. So, yeah, I mean, the mentorship piece was pretty important, and it was the mentorship piece that also kind of drove me to go to Howard University. Going back in time a little bit before that, I actually in high school, when I was applying to colleges, I applied to the different schools, different tiers, state schools, of course, CUNY, because I went to a neighborhood high school. I went to Boys and Girls High School. So a lot of folks went to like what they call SUNY, the State University of New York schools, or CUNY. Some folks were able to go out of state, but it wasn't that common for folks to go out of state. And definitely it wasn't that common for folks to get recruited or students to get recruited from Ivy League schools. This particular year, Cornell was actually recruiting at our high school, and I went to go visit Cornell and stayed on the campus actually for a weekend. And I ended up getting accepted to both Cornell and Howard University. They only accepted two students that year. It was myself, who was the salutatorian, and the valedictorian, who ultimately chose Dartmouth. But anyway, I remember my guidance counselor, during the course of the year, she said, okay, when are you going to send your acceptance letter, or your letter of acceptance back to Cornell? And I said, oh, well, I wasn't planning to because I'm going to Howard. And her mouth dropped, and she was just kind of like, how do you choose Howard over Cornell? And I said, well, there are several reasons why I decided on Howard. Like I said, I wanted to be in DC. I always wanted to go to a historically Black college. When I went to go visit the schools, that just felt like the place I wanted to be. But needless to say, I was the talk of my high school amongst my guidance counselors, amongst all the guidance counselors, because I guess they thought that I was really squandering an opportunity that students from our school didn't often get. But it turned out well, as you can see. So no regrets there. But I really found that at Howard University, I found the nurturing and the level of mentorship that really laid a strong foundation for me feeling like I could really accomplish anything that I wanted to. Again, not to say that that could not have been obtained at other universities, but I can only speak to my experience at Howard. I had some amazing professors. I can still remember their names: Alvin Thornton, John Cotman, my political science professor, just in case they happen to be watching this podcast, and my pre-law advisor, Professor Morris, who wanted me to go to Berkeley because he went to Berkeley. I said, I'm not going to California. But yeah, they really just instilled to me this strong sense of confidence and again, just intellectual excellence. And so applying to Harvard and NYU and Georgetown, it wasn't really a question about, or I didn't really have much doubt. I mean, I thought, okay, well, we'll see if I get in or if I don't get in. But it wasn't something that I was afraid to pursue. And I did have pretty decent grades, and my LSAT score was pretty solid, and I had great letters of recommendation, and I thought I had a good personal statement. So from a package perspective, I felt like I was a strong candidate across the board. Now, another interesting thing to point out at this time is that also at Howard at the time, there was a program called the Ronald E. McNair program, which I think they have at other universities, but it's to encourage more African American students and more students of color to pursue PhDs. And for a while, I was thinking, I was like, well, maybe I do want to pursue my doctorate. I was very much into studying critical race theory, much to the chagrin of folks down in Florida. But so I participated in the program, and I ended up taking the GRE as well. And so I applied to both graduate school and law school at all the universities that I applied to. And I said, okay, if I get into the PhD program and the JD program, then I'll go. So I ended up getting into Yale's PhD program. They only chose like 10 students for that graduate program in political science, but didn't get into the law school. And then I
Wow.
got into Harvard Law School, but didn't get into the Harvard Kennedy School of Government that I applied to. So then, and Yale wouldn't let me defer. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to make the call here. So I decided to go with my first choice, what I had always planned to do, go to law school. Again, I don't regret it because I'd probably still be in school right now if I had decided to do that dual degree. But yeah, and Harvard actually was the last school that I received my acceptance letter from. I really think they were on the fence with me. Because I remember receiving my financial aid letter. I remember this. It was like really late, like April. Like graduation is in May. I swear it was like early April. I was ready to go to Columbia because I had gone and said this Columbia. I said, okay, I'm gonna go to Columbia. I'm gonna go back home to New York. And I remember getting the financial aid package and so congratulations on being accepted to Harvard. But I hadn't gotten the letter of acceptance yet. And then like a couple of days later, the letter of acceptance came. So I think I was I kind of avoided the wait list, but they was like, okay, let's talk about her a little bit. But I don't care. I got in, and it's all she wrote from there.
Wow, what a story. That's incredible. A lot to unpack, and I think we could actually do a whole separate episode on that separately. But just moving forward a little bit further, as you graduated and you entered the corporate world, and then you also mentioned the interest in technology, in particular, especially when you joined Google. Where did that interest come from? Especially that, very, very niche at the same time, but also highly specialized as well. I would imagine that's another layer of complexity, especially when it comes to law. Tell us a little bit more about that decision. What were some of the initial discoveries, especially working with a technology company? And, I would imagine there's also a lot of interaction with other founders, other entrepreneurs, and other technology companies in general.
Mhm.
Maybe share some of those insights, that thought process early stage, and maybe some of the examples, just how did that really help shape that career that you've accomplished so far.
Yeah, no, thank you. So this was maybe around, I guess, like around like 2011, 2012. Like I said, I was at my firm, Manatt, Phelps and Phillips, and we were supporting like major brands in like the financial services industry, consumer goods industry, entertainment as well. And there was definitely an uptick on the impact of privacy, and focus on privacy, particularly from consumer protection agencies like the Federal Trade Commission and also the National Advertising Division, which we were very active participants in. And so I just started to realize a trend that, a lot of companies were starting to ask more questions about what should go on our privacy policy. And, we want to run these different types of promotions, but we want to put like a widget, and we have to collect certain types of information, but now we're going to be collecting it digitally. It was like we were evolving and moving into this new realm of becoming more reliant on technology for things that we have been doing in the past, like doing marketing and promotions and sponsorships. But because we were entering into this new age, a lot of our clients weren't well prepared or weren't very knowledgeable about exactly what they needed to do in order to really sort of comply with this industry, which was at that time and still is to a much respect self-regulated, right? This wasn't a matter of a lot of what they call black letter law, where you look in the books and see this is what you can and cannot do. So we were all operating in this area of a bit of ambiguity and taking chance. And that actually appealed to me a bit. Again, trying to having the opportunity to kind of be a part of the development and how these things were going to advance. And I remember meeting who's now my VP, Ted Lazarus, at one of these conferences, who was at Google. Again, this was like at 2013. I met him, and he was just so approachable and just like a really like nice guy. And I spoke to him about my interest in moving into technology. He said, "Oh, well, definitely, keep us in mind." I was like, "Yeah, I'll definitely keep Google in mind." And so yeah, I after just realizing where we were going with technology being such a major focus area and such an area where there was going to be a need for a lot of support and guidance, that's when I became pretty proactive about getting into the technology space. And kind of putting a plug in for the importance of networking, I basically told a couple of my friends, like, hey, I'm interested in getting into tech. I'm looking to go in house. If you hear anything, let me know. And one of my closest friends, who also went to Harvard Law School with me, she had another friend who was also an alum of Harvard and was working at Google. The alum sent her the posting at Google. She sent it to me. She connected us. I sent her my resume. She referred me, and that's how that happened. So I really got through the door through that network and through those relationships. But I think now, even where we are, like with respect to AI, I think we know where we can kind of see the signs on the wall. And my approach has always been to really try to stay ahead if I can. That's not always the case, but where you definitely see that there is a need for advisement, particularly in these areas that's still evolving. Again, that helps me kind of feel like I'm staying very fresh in my practice and in my learning. So I think that's kind of what was the really impetus for me to jump into technology, realizing that there was going to be a need for someone to come in and develop expertise and help bring people on board.
To double click further on the importance of networking, it's something that, I wish I realized the importance of that a lot sooner, and just the power of that. But there's art and science to that at the same time,
Hmm.
and it's challenging. It's very difficult, and a lot of networking events are just they all the same, and it just never works. Especially if it's just specifically designed as a networking event, it seems very surfacey, very superficial. So I had to learn kind of in practice different avenues and ways to network with folks, just maybe
Hmm.
outside of those specifically designed networking events, so to say, quote unquote. And during my time at Harvard, that was one of the things that I've learned. One of the key takeaways is leveraging, for example, the power of a podcast as well. One of my professors was still a very good friend. He actually brought that up. He has a podcast of his own, and he's so high up there the food chain. He still has that podcast, and he did open that up to me, saying that it's a great tool for me to network with folks of completely different profile, completely outside of my industries and so forth. So that was eye-opening, and I'm like, okay, why not? I'll get a mic and I'll start talking to some of my friends. And one thing led to another, and look, I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
So that's just one example, but curious to get your perspectives, your strategies, or maybe some of the things that really worked well for you when it comes to networking. How did you approach maybe the folks that really were instrumental, as based on what you were describing in your education and now in your career?
Hmm.
Talk to us a little bit through that process as an examples, because good portion of our listeners are early stage career professionals, and that's an ongoing conversation as well. It's how do I go about this? What are some of the things that really helped you? Or maybe the other way, maybe here's some of the things that I shouldn't have done but I learned from that.
Yeah. So like you said, it's an art and a science to it. There I don't think there's any perfect regimen, but I'll definitely share with you some things that have worked for me. I would say be intentional about, the individuals or the affiliations or organizations that you want to network with. I mean, honestly speaking, we only have but so much time on our hands. So one of the challenges I find is that even when you go to all these places and you meet these people and you get LinkedIn and connected and all this kind of stuff, it's the follow up, is the actual cultivation of the relationship that sometimes falls by the wayside. And honestly, you just don't have time to deal with everyone. So I would say try to be very intentional about those individuals that you really feel like, okay, these are individuals who I'm going to be able to actually cultivate a relationship with. And depending on where you are, what stage you are in your career, if you're junior, mid-level, or senior, that's going to evolve over time. But I think at each and every phase, you want to be somewhat intentional about that. And then if you are seeking to network with these individuals, of course, I would have some level of clarity regarding sort of why you want to engage, particularly if you're looking to network with folks that are a bit more senior in their careers. You don't just want to say like, hey, I just wanted to say hi. Like you want to have like, kind of like your 5-minute pitch or your like elevator talk about what it is that you're really seeking, how you feel like, what is the intention behind trying to formulate a relationship there. And then, it can start off, relatively casual. Let's say, I would like to meet for coffee sometime and talk sometime. But again, it's about really establishing the relationship. I mean, the power of the network is the strength of the relationship. And, all of us have like thousands of LinkedIn, connections, but it's the relationships that really are going to allow us to, advance in certain ways, and which is why we're making those connections in the first place. And then I would say also, as far as networking is concerned, like even as you are pursuing certain networks for your own benefit, also be mindful, particularly, and this is something that I'm being more mindful now as I get more senior in my career, of those who are looking to network with you as well. I strongly believe in a pipeline, particularly, within the African American community, within minority communities. It's really important that, I don't care if it sounds cliche, that we continue to lift as we climb. It's incredibly important. I don't feel like I would be here if but for the warriors that came before me. So I think that, it's important to be, somewhat also receptive when folks reach out to you. It's important to pay it forward. I think I want to put that plug there. And the last thing I'll say is something that you mentioned about being expansive with your network, where we have this, I'm sure you heard the term board of directors, right? Like you want to have like everyone should have a board of directors, sort of like a team that, they can help them sort of navigate certain things professionally, personally, when it comes to business, just general advancement opportunities. And so, I also find that it helps to have diversity within that span and within that scope as well. So I don't want us, particularly as minorities, to, like you said, limit ourselves to those who only look like us, because there are other opportunities that can come from engaging, particularly with allies, true allies. And I think that sometimes people might miss the mark on that, or sometimes honestly people are maybe intimidated. But I want to encourage our listeners and folks to say, like, if there is an individual, regardless of what gender or race they may be, that you feel like it would be a benefit to meet, definitely take a swing at it.
Being almost said, very high up the corporate ladder in your current stage of the career as a general counsel or senior counsel right now in one of the top global organizations in the world, the hiring process and just surrounding yourself with the top performers is, it's a probably 24/7 job, and finding the right talent but being able to select and then retain that becomes another layer of complexity, which is very challenging, and it's an ongoing area for improvement, at least for myself. So curious to get your thoughts or strategies that really worked well for you in the past or currently working when it comes to finding great candidates for your teams. Talk to us a little bit about that selection process, maybe a glimpse into an interview with you. What are some of the questions that you like to ask? And more importantly, what do you look for in the responses when you talk to potential candidates?
Yeah, no. So it's a great question because definitely having a strong team, which I've been pretty fortunate to have at Google for the most part, really, is definitely critical to success and just wellness in general, peace of mind when you can really have folks that you can rely on to work autonomously and that you don't have to micromanage. So that's one of the main things I look for whenever we are onboarding candidates. Technology can be pretty fast paced. We have some wonderful clients in house, but they can also be very very excited and very anxious when it comes to getting things out the door. So we have to be responsive and we have to support and be partners as much as we can. So I would say definitely just the ability to properly assess situations, assess the nature of risk. In our field, like I said, sometimes there's not like a clear answer. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different matters and interests and issues to gauge from the business side, policy side, legal side, product side. So you want someone who is, or I want someone who understands that there's a certain level of complexity that involves a deeper level of assessing than just kind of reading a law and just kind of interpreting it and applying it. So someone who has those analytical skills, someone who can properly calibrate risk, and again, someone who I feel confident can work autonomously. I think those are some of the key things I look for in a successful candidate from a substantive perspective. And then you want someone who you're going to enjoy working with. I think we have this thing at Google called googliness, right? And I know it really sounds pretty corny, but I do think that as far as like the culture of a company is concerned, it really matters, the type of personalities that you're bringing in. There are a lot of smart people, a lot of very, very smart people, but just because you are smart and capable of, assessing the law and things like that, that doesn't always make you a great fit. In general, I want to make sure I plug that into, in addition to sort of the substantive things that I look for in a successful candidate.
With Google being a global organization, another layer of complexity is collaboration virtually as well. And
Mm.
that's been elevated through the past couple of years, as we all had experienced. Share with us strategies that help you succeed in that space. How do you build meaningful relationships virtually? And how do you go about expanding that network, maybe within the organization? It's hard to do it, in person to begin with, and to do
Yeah.
that virtually adds, a lot more complexity to that. Maybe share some thoughts around that with us.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously the pandemic just kind of changed a lot for us as far as the work dynamic is concerned. Right now at Google, we're hybrid, like a lot of companies are hybrid. So 3 days in, 2 days out. And there's a lot of flexibility there as well. So some folks, if they choose to work remotely full time, they can. I'm more of a proponent of some in office engagement. I do think that it helps with camaraderie. I do think that it helps with again, maintaining a particular type of culture and also relationships. So I sometimes actually worry about sort of the millennials and the Gen Zers who are so excited about this whole new world where they could, I guess, work from Cartagena and just be like, well, as long as I'm getting my job done, it should be fine. I do think that having those interpersonal interactions, the water cooler talks, I do think that's still important. But I mean, obviously, as a global company, I work with partners in APAC and EMEA and LATAM, and obviously we're not, hanging out together at the water cooler. So the way we maintain these relationships and develop these relationships, we of course have like weekly syncs, bi-weekly syncs. I lead these syncs, and sometimes during the meeting before we dive into deals and processes and contracts, we'll take a few minutes to say, hey, does anyone have good news to share? Or does anyone, have anything that they want to share? Just kind of, having that more social element. I find, can sort of connect us even across seas, other than when we're just kind of diving in and talking about work stuff. And then, more locally, we do have, offsites from time to time where, we may go out like after work and, have, for those who can make it, maybe do like a happy hour or drinks or something like that. Actually, one thing that another team did at Google that I'm going to steal from, they all went to like a food bank together. Because we're also trying to cut back on expenses like everyone else. So it's kind of like, okay, what fun things can we do that necessarily doesn't eat into our cost center? And I think like a service project like that, it'll be really fun to do. I've already put that on my director's radar, so that's something that we're going to do. But I think having those types of opportunities in this new post COVID pandemic world that we're in, where we have more options to kind of be distant, I think that we should still maintain some level of focus on intention about how we can stay physically connected, not just digitally connected.
Those are great examples, absolutely. And then but it's such a complicated space, especially when you're dealing with, team members all over the world, and to build those relationships, it's an ongoing area for improvement. So I appreciate you sharing
Mhm.
some of those examples. Those were great. And the last portion of every episode, I typically focus on just every guest on you as a person, as an individual, as a human being. And one of the first questions that I like to ask is, it could be a very loaded question. I could realize that. At the same time, um, at least for me, it's an ongoing reflection for myself on the advice, or maybe a series of advice that I would give myself when I was first starting out, maybe fresh out of college or something like that. And sometimes it changes, sometimes it doesn't, but my theme is always relatively similar. Curious to get your thoughts on what would you tell your 22, 23 younger self, young Kawana, who's just graduating or maybe getting into college or getting into corporate world. What would be some of the things you would tell yourself, knowing what you know now? And what would be just kind of that series of advice that you would share with yourself?
Wow, yeah, that is a great question. And it could vary depending on, again, coming out of high school, coming out of college. But generally speaking, what I would tell my younger self, like in that 20-year range, 20th year um, time period, which I call the roaring 20s. I had some real fun at during my 20s. But I would say be a bit more bullish, take more chances. Again, they say risk averse people go to law school and risk takers go to business school. And I will say honestly, I have been pretty risk averse, always playing it very safe, close to the chest, feeling like, I don't want the bottom to fall out from under me, because I don't know if I'll be able to bounce back. I've always been concerned about the bounce back. And I feel like in retrospect, when you're younger, I think that you have just more runway to make certain mistakes and to kind of recover and move forward. Not to say that it can't happen later, but I do think that I really wish I would have possibly taken a bit more chances. When I was younger, because I think it could have worked out for me. I mean, things could have gone south. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business person. Sometimes you hit the moon, sometimes you hit rock bottom. But I think if you have a good foundation, and then you have obviously have a fallback plan, it won't be the end of the world. And I can give an anecdote. When I bought my brownstone here in Brooklyn in 2009, I was 29 years old, so relatively young to buy a Brooklyn brownstone. But I was lucky because I was able to save up money, because I was living with my parents for a few years after law school. My father, who has always been more entrepreneurial than me, he used to have businesses and everything like that when he was younger. He asked me, he was like, wow, he said to me, he's like, wow, I'm so proud of you for getting your own home. I was still single at the time. And so he was like, this is great that you were able to do it. He's like, do you want to get another one? You want to buy another brownstone? I was like, oh no. I was like, no, I was like, I don't want to buy another brownstone. I was like, going through this process was hard enough, getting the mortgage. I'm by myself. I don't have anyone to share the mortgage with me. I was like, no, I'm good. Of course, that was in 2009. Fast forward. I certainly wish that I would have been racking up like Monopoly. So again, I really wish I would have had just a more bullish mentality. And I just encourage folks to, again, don't be frivolous, obviously, still make informed decisions, but don't be afraid to take more risks. That's what I would say.
That's a very powerful advice, and I appreciate you thinking so quick on the spot about something like that. I know it's not easy. And speaking of taking of risks, I mean, you obviously built a safety net that doesn't get any safer than that, especially with given your education, your career. But you're taking risks now. Look, you NLP investor in our fund, venture fund. That that's why that's a huge risk of its own. So
I'm a late bloomer, but I'm here.
yeah, exactly. But that's a great advice. I think that oftentimes goes, very overlooked. So that's a great reminder. I appreciate that. And the last question I have is, I ask that every guest on the podcast is, what's your most gifted book, or which maybe book, or maybe a couple of books that really had a profound impact on you? So just curious to get your some of the recommendations for you.
Yeah, no, I do know that I've read some amazing literature. Not all books I honestly remember, even though I remember reading them and enjoying them. But one book that I can read time and time again, and I've actually just recently made my nephew read, is James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. Um, it's a powerful, impactful, timeless work of literature. And the reason why it resonates with me is because and unfortunately the things that he discusses in that book with regard to race relations, and discriminatory practice and the struggles of the African American community, even though he wrote that book during the civil rights movement, um, there are issues there that are still quite prevalent today. And so it just one, his writing is brilliant. James Baldwin is just a masterful author, but it's just power in that text. And I just think it's something that just kind of keeps me grounded, but keeps me motivated as well, notwithstanding I want to make sure I acknowledge the progress that we've made, as a country, as a community, as a people. But there's obviously still a long ways to go. But I'm just so incredibly thankful for our civil rights heroes and our past heroes like James Baldwin, who had the courage to initially put these things out there, and now they're continuing to be exposed even at a greater level, and that exposure is causing much more attention and actual action to happen now on a greater level. So I think that that book will remain timeless, and it's something that keeps me wanting to be a part of anything that I can do to make things better for the generations that come behind me, even if I may not be able to benefit from some of those things within my own lifetime.
Well, that's great. Great recommendation. Definitely appreciate that. We'll make the title and the author available in the show notes. And Kawana, I can't thank you enough for your time today. It was a very short and insightful and inspiring conversation. Definitely, with some of the guests, I love doing a follow-up recording in about a year where we revisit the conversation from a year ago and see if everything we've discussed still makes sense, still applies. So I definitely look forward to doing that with you as well.
Absolutely. Likewise. Well, again, thank you so much, John, for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And I'm so appreciative that you brought me on to be a part of your podcast. Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much.